United States Naval Office of Intelligence. Steve, your first thoughts. Gunman walks in, targets everybody. I mean, everybody in this small church. 50 people, at least 24, if not 27 of them are killed. The other 20, probably almost everybody in that church, wounded, including a 2-year-old. We're also told, as Arthel just said, the 14-year-old daughter of the pastor. The guy then runs out, gets in his car, and he's stopped about 5 miles away and is shot dead. Your initial thoughts about any possible motivation? Of course, it's still early. What do you think?
Well, obviously, police are going to investigate the motive. But, Eric, you asked a question that every single American right now is asking. You asked this question of the Attorney General. How do you wrap your head around this? Why? And the answer is becoming clear to me as I've been a career law enforcement officer. Eric, we have been so inundated with violence in this country. We wake up in the morning and our kids are watching violence on cartoons. We look at reality shows and we see violence. We see our political people fighting with each other. I mean, it goes on and on and on. And so when we look at the question why is, we may be the reason why. We really have to come together as a nation. And we have to ask ourselves, where are we going with all of this? What are we going to do to solve the problem? And I believe it's going to take Hollywood to help us and I mean, to really help us with regard to a lot of the violence that they're putting out. It's going to be parents who are going to have to sit down with their children, spend more time with them. And it's going to have to be families noting that there may be a family member who is becoming so overwhelmed with the violence in this country where we're going to have to say, hey, look, we're going to have to take you to see someone. And going back to another point you brought up, you say something, you see something, say something. A lot of people are afraid to say something because they've been conditioned to believe if you say something, you're going to become part of a long court process. You're going to be involved in something you don't want to be involved in. We need to recondition everyone and to share with them, look, if you see something and say something, all you got to do is tell the police. You're not going to get involved in anything other than telling the police.
Well, you know, but sometimes what happens, I mean, look, we don't know what the motive of this is at the moment. We don't know if it's domestic terrorism. We don't know if it's international terrorism. We don't know if it's just a nutcase. We don't know if it's a domestic dispute and he decided to take his hatred out on everybody in that church, or if it's hatred, a hate crime against a religion, like we saw against a race, for example, like we saw in Charleston, South Carolina, or in this case, a religion. But I mean, what do you do? Sometimes people go to the police and you say, look, this guy's threatening, this guy's this, and they say there's nothing we can do, you know, unless, you know, actually does something.
Well, you're right, and that's what normally happens. So the police are going to have to be retrained also and say, look, if someone comes in, look, when I was working at a detective bureau, there would be people that would come in and say, you know, I saw something just didn't fit with me. I would send detectives out to maybe survey the situation, ask some questions. Our police have to understand that. They do that, I know, in the larger cities. But now we know, don't we, Eric? Now we know that everyone is vulnerable, even in small towns, to things like this. And you're right. Until we find the motive, we're not going to really understand how this occurred. But my goodness, there was a trigger point somewhere. And that's something that the police are really going to have to dig in and find out where that trigger point was. If it was domestic violence, if it was a terrorist act, those are important questions that have to be answered very quickly. And hopefully in this press conference, they'll answer it.
Yeah, what does your gut say? I mean, I know it's hard to put you out there, but what does your gut say? You have someone who drove away and he's caught in a field nearby. He's got an SUV.
My gut saying it was something that could have been domestic related. He probably knew people in the church. In other words, it's close to home. He probably lived in the area. It doesn't seem to me that it was a terrorist act.
All right, Steve, certainly the investigation is continuing. We will get a update from the news conference from the City Hall, expecting the governor